Hi and welcome to week 3 in our Treating Trauma course, Social Work 664. And for this week, our theme is trauma pushing the edges. And so this week, we're going to really start to focus in on specifically the impact of childhood trauma upon someone who is in the midst of developing. So thinking about how this ends up impacting personality development, how it can create experiences of disassociation and hypervigilance, and really how the developing brain is severely impacted in a way that does cut across different life stages as one continues into adulthood. So for this, I just want to really encourage you to make sure that you hold your self-care in place. Really think of your own safety plan so you can fully engage with the material, because when we're talking about the impact of trauma on children, it can hit us in an especially vulnerable place, whether we connect that with our own children or our experiences as children who may have been impacted by trauma as well, or just stories that can be really disturbing. So given this, our objectives for this week is to give you a sense of how to increase your own knowledge of affect regulation and also dysregulation. So really being able to recognize the difference between the two and how this is related to trauma. We want you to be able to come away from this week identifying the impacts of trauma as they progressively accumulate from childhood. Our third objective is for you to get a chance to reflect about your own process as you're working through some of the information in this course, knowing that, again, I've given the metaphor before that trauma is like an onion, so you're peeling back layer by layer, and that we have new reactions, feelings, emotions as we are examining some of this material. And then last of all, to get a sense of how to demonstrate some techniques that are geared to be able to increase your affect regulation, help you do some emotional regulation, increase your trust, and also increase your relaxation and stress reduction in the midst of this course. We will have several technique demonstrations to really illustrate this objective. So for this week's reading, I want you to focus on one that is a Red Book article. And so it's a story of a woman with multiple personalities, which we now know as dissociative identity disorder. You will have a chapter in Perry, chapter 6, and this is also the case study for which you will use for your discussion forum. You will have chapter 4 in Rothschild, and in Vander Kolk, we want you to focus on part 3, the minds of children. So in addition to that, we'll ask that you look through a PowerPoint presentation on neurobiology and trauma, which really goes through the different mechanisms of the trauma impact on the body. And we'll ask you to look at all of the videos below. You'll see the first one is on dissociative identity disorder. The second one is by Bessel van der Kolk, which we've been reading, Childhood Trauma, Affect Regulation, and Borderline Personality. And the last one is an interview with a child abuse victim. As this is a 7.5-minute video. But again, this is an area that you really want to keep your safety plan and your self-care intact. And so after you have done some of this work on reading and looking at our different media, we want you to dive into the discussion for this week. And so this is using the different perspectives that we claim as part of social work: the micro dimension, the meso dimension, the macro dimension, and the last dimension, which we call the therapeutic approaches. And so for this one, we want you to develop a post that specifically uses one of the dimensions, and you will apply it to the case example. So your case example is going to be chapter 6 of Perry's book, which is your reading for this week. And so you'll notice that if you look at the week 1 availability poll, it'll remind you what your letter is. And for each different letter, you have a different dimension. So if you're a student who is one of the B students in the availability poll, you're going to complete a post that addresses the micro dimension, and so on. You want to make sure that at least 3 references, and you can go up to as many citations, but it should be included to just really give background to your ideas. Show me how you're integrating some of the material. We want you to paraphrase, not necessarily quote directly. We don't need you to summarize the case example. Everyone's reading the same. And you'll see guidelines for, really how to address the micro dimension, the meso, the macro, and the therapeutics. For example, in the micro dimension, if you have this this week, you want to focus on the person as an individual and clinically, and try to think about their individual relationships with others, and then specifically address examples of physical impact, so internal well-being that you see represented, examples of emotional impact on the individual, psychological impact on the individual, and examples of social impact on the individual. So all individually focused. And of course, if you're meso dimension, you're really going to focus on the individual's groups, family, education, employment, etc. Macro would focus on the large systems. It's not clinical. It's not directly individual. This is state systems, national systems, laws, etc. And then the therapeutic approaches dimension is going to be focusing on the person in the case example and addressing their potential therapeutic needs. For this, we ask that you create your initial post, but you do not need to respond to your classmates. We, of course, want you to read through all of your classmates' posts to really learn about the other types of dimensions that you did not cover for this particular discussion forum. This is due by Thursday, and any follow-up posts and reading is due by Sunday. The second discussion for this week is about the technique demonstrations. So if you're someone who has signed up for this week, you are going to post your technique demonstration video as well as the written instructions as your first initial post. If you're not assigned for this week, if you did not sign up, then you will not do any initial post, but you will just watch and follow along with each of your peers' technique demonstrations. And then after reading through and watching the videos, you want to respond to each of your peers. So you will have multiple response posts. And then if you did post your technique demonstration, you want to make sure that you're responding to everyone else as well. The important thing for those that are posting technique demonstrations is that you also make sure to upload your written instructions in the tab that is under major assignments. This is commonly forgotten, but this is the area that we actually can grade your technique demonstration, and we grade both the video and then the written instructions. So you'll see that I'll make a comment to you in the feedback area for the initial post, but I'll put the actual grading in under the major projects and assignments. So you'll see a tab for that. At the end of this week on Sunday, we'll ask you to submit week 3 journal. And again, this is under your major projects and assignments areas, all of those instructions. But this is a chance for you to really process some of the material in accordance to some of those questions that I'm asking. How does this change your perspective individually? How does it change your view of others? And how can you incorporate it into your work For this, examples really help, and making sure that you're using in-text citations and trying to at least incorporate and integrate half of the material that we have looked at for those last 2 weeks. So this is our week 3 in a nutshell. And I just wanted to take a moment to address something I mentioned earlier in this video, which is the concept of safety plans. And so in the trauma world, we really talk about safety plans. This is a concept that Dr. Sandra Bloom describes in her book, Creating Sanctuary. And it's really the idea that it is prioritizing one sense of safety: emotional safety, physical safety, moral safety, and relational safety first. And really working from this base for ourselves and for other people. And so, I really invite you to think about creating and using a safety plan. And what this is a predetermined list, and something that you can imagine might fit on an index card. But this is something where you can mentally and physically kind of ensure that you remain safe, especially if a topic, an activity, or the environment you're in is being perceived as kind of dangerous or threatening or stressful. So it's almost to keep yourself sort of back down on that level to be able to use a full, cognitive part of your brain. So there's 2 basic categories of safety plans. One is kind of an internal safety plan, and this is something that has to be able to be done in the moment. So an internal one is a type of plan that focuses on what you can mentally do to remain calm, like choosing to focus on something else or doing a mental mantra. Some people talk about prayer. And it could even be, deep breathing, but is really more internal. Then there's things that you can do externally, and this is what a person can physically do to create safety, and to sort of calm themselves down, get themselves back in that thinking, planning, abstracting mode. And we try to really encourage the ability to sit and think through what this plan is ahead of time, because in the moment your brain state is really dropping to its survival mode, whether you're just feeling overwhelmed, stressed, irritated, agitated, or just completely triggered by what you're reading, what you're talking with, or when you're working with a client. So you want to have this thought out beforehand and utilize the things that are part of your normal coping. But it must be something that can be done in that moment. So it can't just be, let's visit the beach and let's go on vacation. It needs to be something that can help sort of drop you back down to a calm state. So I want you to give some thought over this next week to what your safety plan looks like for yourself. And even further, what other people's safety plans around you look like. So your loved ones, your own children, clients that you work with, what their safety plans include. If you have any thoughts about that, put it in the student lounge area, or you can also mention in any of your discussion forums. Have a wonderful week, and I will check in with you at the end of week 3.